Welcome to the Kate Was Here Q&A. You've asked questions or will be asking questions, and we will be answering them. Hi, I'm Kat Blackard.
Hey, I'm Doug Banks.
And we are very excited to, after many months, be talking about Kate Was Here. So some of you fine folks at Patreon have listened to the entire sprawling series, and that's really cool.
It's crazy. I thought we'd be the only ones. After we started, just be like, oh yeah, maybe I'll listen to the end. But wow.
I mean, it's been very well received. The show has been very well received, and which is extraordinarily flattering.
Yeah, because it's so long.
I guess we should make a point of saying that if you haven't finished listening to Kate Was Here, you really shouldn't be listening to this. This is Spoiler City, USA.
Yeah, I don't. I can't imagine why you'd have if you only listen like one episode and you start already having questions like, do you even know what happens? Like, do you even know that this is where this thing even goes? How?
This is the victory lap. This is where we hang out and go real deep and get into the weeds even more than we already have.
Yeah.
In our post game discussion, and now both of us have had quite some time to, sit on this.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
I haven't gone back and listened to everything from the beginning, but I did do first episode, last episode to see how much Kate changed. And I'm like, holy shit, which was, really fun.
Why don't you discuss that? Because I actually haven't gone back and listened to anything. I'd like to, but
I don't know. It was great just to see to hear how you started playing the game. Even in reality, kind of I don't know what we're really doing, but, here's what this is taking this one step at a time and, okay, with friends or whatever, knowing that something will happen eventually, just throwing caution to the wind, let's just go for this or whatever. And, Kate being in these situations where she's in the back seat of, Eli's car and Jimmy's like, oh, Kate, I'm so sorry I dragged you into this. And you're like, I'm 16 years old, or I'm 17. What the fuck? I'm scared out of my mind. I have 4 doobies on me. I'm so scared right now. And then the end.
I didn't say doobies.
No, but that was the whole.
Just checking.
But that was that was oh my gosh, this is so bad. How could it get, it couldn't get worse, could it? Knowing that things were most likely going to get worse. But being that person who was so quickly thrown out of their element because they're in a dangerous situation to begin with, suddenly in the end ziplining down, that person disappears into a fridge, and then 2 seconds later, this person who was gunslinging in the Old West, stopping bounty hunters 3 days ago, swoops in and confronts an entire gang with nothing but zappy gloves and a Swiss Army knife from the future.
And a firm word.
Yeah. Yeah. and so they're not the same person. But any good story, stories are, machines for change, of characters.
Yeah.
So I just was so happy with how it turned out,
It's funny. I've never. I can say this a million times over and over again about many aspects of Kate Was Here, but I've really never experienced anything like this before, ever. I mean, Kate was always played, in a way that was, let's say, realistic to the way I felt that character should be reacting at this moment in time. But I couldn't really tell you other instances, even over long form games that we've played and recorded in the past, like Dungeons and Doritos, where that has changed. I think Estelle changes in Call of Cthulhu. She definitely, Series 2 ends in a different place, and when we will see that character again, she's got that she's living with the baggage of that, because the Cthulhu campaigns by their nature are traumatic events.
Yeah.
But it's still it's really just not the same as Kate. But similar. That's probably the most similar one. But even years of playing Jamela evolves as a character. Jamela changes. Jamela expands, but Jamela is still a character in a medieval fantasy setting, and therefore is ready to bust some heads and is not typically shy about anything. And I guess that there's a certain quality of the ways that someone solves problems that didn't really change there. I'm sure someone could figure out some ways that Jamela changed as a person.
Well, yeah, but the goals are different when you were playing these different games. Cthulhu is a mystery to be solved, and you make an intrepid, investigator of some kind, and that they're going to come up against some crazy things. So depending on how you want to do it, you either purposefully prepare to face terrible things, or you make someone who's a little underprepared if they want to keep it realistic so that they go insane or whatever. Dungeons and Doritos, it's like any other D&D campaign where you can make like a more fully complete person because you are escaping into a fantasy and into a fun, adventure or whatever. But this was very intentionally from the beginning, make a person.
Right. Just
like,
a person.
yeah, and just play it as normal, like just react how a person would normally react, because no one, I've never played a game where that was the goal. Like, it was always like, even in Ghostbusters, I was just like, hey, you guys play yourselves, but play yourselves if this was the real, if ghosts were real and this was this. And they changed some of their stories. Like, well, if I thought ghosts were real, my life would be different, and this is how we do it or whatever.
Yeah.
And if you listen to the first episode of Ghostbusters and you listen to the season finale of season 1, they've changed because they've become heroes. They were zeros and then become heroes. But that was always kind of the aim. It wasn't meant to be realistic. It's meant to be like a movie. This was meant to be more realistic, at least in my mind, in terms of like, let's both create a character, mostly you, but who are they? What are their fears? What are their hopes? And when I don't have an end point in mind, but if we throw them into the thick of it, sink or swim, will they change because of the adventure, or will Kate still remain the same regardless?
Yeah. On the thread of that development and not knowing where things were going to go, Jess asks, of you, was it difficult to keep up with the continuity of the story once things got off the path that you had planned?
Not really. I mean, not any more than if it was in the way that I had planned. Because most of the planning that I did was between sessions. Like, if I knew where we were starting, which was every time, because Kate jumps somewhere into a random year, and we say, all right, I'll end it there. And then I just spend the next week or 2 weeks or however long it is preparing for that. So I know basically who's there and, whatever. But, there was no continuity. I mean, do you mean like the continuity of Back to the Future or the continuity of our own story?
I think the continuity of Kate was here. Like things start moving around all of a sudden. You have an outline of bullet points, but like, also every successive. Sometimes there are huge gaps in between sessions.
Yeah. No, for me, it wasn't. There wasn't much continuity to fuck up because we were just charging ahead.
Right.
Unless Kate was literally going to be like, okay, we're gonna go back in time. I'm gonna have a conversation with myself. Whatever. Then it might get a little tricky. But I'm sure Doc would have said like, that's a terrible idea. We don't do that or whatever.
Well, were you keeping notes on like after every session of like, here's what happened this time, so as not to
minimum, because usually unless Kate said, I want to do this exact thing, I would make sure we plan for that. But rarely were we in a situation where I was like, like, oh gosh, this changes everything I had planned, because I usually don't even plan until we're in between those sessions anyway. I mean,
also, the way your brain works is so... you're juggling a lot. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. Like the way that the brain works in terms of having like the short-term hard drive space and the long-term hard drive space. As it stands, correct me if I'm wrong here. I remember you saying something like after it was over that like a bunch of space kind of got freed up. And
it's like a temporary hard drive where when we're playing, when Kate shows up in the Ice Age, I was like, okay, like I literally spent hours online being like, okay, what creatures were around in North America on the West Coast at the time? Is there a mastodon woolly mammoth situation? Would it realistically be there? Saber-toothed cats, would they be there? And because I wasn't just gonna bullshit, like whatever, because I'm a masochist, I guess. But like I just wanted I wanted to have an answer for those questions, because I figured, well, if I think of that question, I'm sure Kat would probably have Kate ask that question, so I would know. And there's nothing that would stop the drama faster than, wait, I hear something rumbling in the bushes. Do I know if saber-toothed cats live in this area at this time? And I go, oh, I don't know. Let me look it up real quick. And then like we wait 5 minutes while I look up the Paleolithic history or whatever. So So I just wanted to be prepared.
Right.
So really, it's prep work and not so much of correcting mistakes or at the same time not planning too far ahead. Like, what if Kate decides to do this? I better choose this. This was the most hands off in planning that I've ever done in running a game. Because
hands off in planning, but extremely complex in terms of research.
Yeah, like I just would research the hell out of a time and place, and when it came to fictional people, I would say, okay, do the movies or comics say where this person is at this time? If so, then that's where they are. If not, I just pick what I think is the most likely thing. But everything else would be trying to be as true to the era that you are in, so I can just answer those questions. Because the way I look at it, you were making the story, and I'm answering questions, is how I felt. And then when it was like when something big and dramatic needs to happen, I have one of 4 set pieces that could happen, and depending on where you are, what the situation is Kate really fearful this episode? Is she confident right now?
Right.
Is she quizzical? Is she being snarky? Like, whatever, adapting the situation to meet what the character was going through, as if it was planned in advance when it isn't.
Yeah, well, it all seemed pretty seamless, so well done.
Yeah,
I mean, I guess you did. Every now and then, I know something probably fell through the cracks. I remember somebody mentioning something that was, wasn't unfortunate. Fortunately, it was not particularly consequential.
I mean,
but
there were things that, like, there were story threads that you just didn't pick up on.
Well, that's for sure.
And I don't think there was a story thread that you didn't notice.
I meant like little tidbits in between sessions that like got forgot.
Oh, well, there were mix-up. You know what? Actually, was it difficult to keep up with like continuity? I mean, I guess at the same time, yes, but usually when it came to dates, you'll notice that there's a couple of times when in before and after sessions, like especially like a pregame session where I go, hey, I need to retcon something really quick. I got the number wrong on this particular date. The actual date is this. And that wouldn't change the story. That just changes the super stickler for, details like me. Like I know when Kate got news that Doc was back in the 1800s, and the supposed Thanksgiving blizzard that killed a bunch of people, that happened on this date. And when you were with Marty, you heard it, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's not whatever. Turns out, I was like, oh, no, wait, I got that wrong. It was actually this year. It was actually on this day. So there's time or whatever. And the same thing when Kate and Doc landed in this wasteland future. The original was like, how long ago did the disaster happen? And because my notes were wrong, and I'm just going off of my notes, I just read off the notes like Ron Burgundy reading off the teleprompter, like, it happened 1 year ago. What the fuck? And it was like, oh, this happened a year ago? And I'm like, wait a minute. And then, like after we record, I'm like, that couldn't have happened 1 year ago. How the fuck could the whole world be like, whatever? And then I look at my notes and I go, oh, I fucked up. It was actually like 5 years ago. And I had and so then I tried to work that into the story where like not only was the DM wrong in telling you the date, but the time circuits were also wrong. But that made sense because the time circuit's supposed to go wrong anyway.
Now I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Like I thought you did it on purpose.
Well, the time circuits being wrong.
Yeah, I thought the date thing was like I thought that was all on purpose.
Well, the date when Jimmy says it happened a year ago, that is a DM mistake. That's my mistake. But my notes,
all right,
my notes were wrong. But then later when they said, oh, you think you're in the year 20 whatever, and you're actually in 2049, that was intentional because you were supposed to realize that you had missed the mark, but it didn't help that I may have muddled it by reading the notes wrong, saying it was only a year ago versus this versus this versus this. But that was my also attempt to bring up like the course correction in terms of like, you think you landed here, but you actually landed here, and that makes the distance between Doomsday and where you are even bigger.
Mm-hmm.
To explain the world and stuff. So
this is a question for you, Doug.
Mm-hmm.
From Becky Scott Fairley. Did Doc set up the time chamber into the mall again for the possibility of sending Kate back in time to close off the potential timeline?
Yeah, I don't think I mentioned it because it never came up. But once Kate was getting back to the mall, well, what used to be the mall, but was now like this storage thing, yeah, I guess we didn't mention it, but if she were to ever look into it, it'd be like, wait a minute, who owned the storage before? Who owns it now? Why is that machine still there? Doc would have bought it out.
Right.
So it would have still been like the same storage thing, but Doc was the owner, and he set that up to make sure that was there.
He knows how to Rube Goldberg reality. Yeah. He's an old shoe at that.
Yeah, and probably perpetuated the rumors because Kate told Doc how she got into that whole situation in the first place. All the rumors around town. And I'm sure Doc was fine with people spreading rumors about him being like some crazy wild-eyed scientist. So I'm sure he sort of spurred that on to keep the rumor mill going. But yeah, in my mind, Doc did set that up. But there's no proof of it. But in my head canon, that's that's the explanation as to why it was there.
I mean, Doug, this is official Kate was here content, so anything you say is law.
Yeah, but maybe I'll change my mind someday. I don't know.
Oh, wow. All right.
I don't know, but I think when we did it, I had this whole thing. If Doc was ready to answer all the questions, if you're like, how did this happen? Did you set this up? How did we know that he would be able to explain it? So.
Right. We got a question from Becky, which is, if Kate was ever in-game going to return to the ice cave, would you have had her graffiti still be there? I could see Doug actually looking up about how long it would take to for spray paint to get worn away over time.
I hadn't given that much thought because I didn't think we'd ever be going back.
But you're right. I could also see Doug looking that up or trying to figure that out. Sounds difficult.
Let me put it this way. If Kate was like, I want to go back to 1701 and find the cave, well, then, yeah, I would look up, see like, well, the paint or like whatever. But if Kate was like, in modern day, like, I want to go find that cave, the cave wouldn't be there. Like, because with the number of earthquakes California had, and like over, thousands of years, there's just no way. I could not imagine that cave, this tiny little cave on the top of a mountain, just sort of still sitting there completely undisturbed, if not also found by other scientists in the meantime. So in my mind, the cave collapsed after a great earthquake somewhere in the BC era before humans even arrived. But yeah.
Well, damn it.
But that's not to like slap it like, you don't get to have any fun, like whatever, but rather like that's just what would happen. But because then, spray paint can only... That is a good question, because, like, how long would the spray paint last? Because
it depends on the conditions, right? Because obviously, like,
cave
paintings,
in real life, so I don't know. But yeah, I would guess that because the cave wasn't that deep, like cave paintings now, you have to be like really far in the back and like out of the light and everything. And even if you shine powerful flashlights on it for too long, it might even break it apart. But
yeah, true enough. Question from Jess. You all have mentioned the comics quite a few times. I was wondering if the Back to the Future animated series or Telltale game was considered as well. I never read the comics, so I'm not sure what all is in them.
The comics are pretty much old Star Wars continuity in my mind, and when it comes to the game, in terms of unless something conflicts, let's just assume that it is canon. As far as the video game is concerned, the video game actually takes place after Kate was here. Like everything with Kate was here happens before. Like, so if you can imagine the timeline of the video game you play as Marty, and it starts in 1986. And when Doc, the DeLorean shows up, Marty hasn't seen Doc in a while or whatever. I don't know if the comic ties into the video game. Or
yeah.
They retold that story in the comic, right?
Bob Gale, the screenwriter for Back to the Future, wrote the comics, or co-wrote the comics, and also wrote the video game. So they are all in continuity. Now, with the Telltale game, it has a bunch of forking paths.
Yeah.
And since they were already publishing the comics, to circumvent like the inevitable questions about like, hey, so now we're looking at all this expanded Back to the Future continuity. What is real? How do we handle that? They did publish a comic book adaptation of the Telltale game storyline, which presents what would be considered the canonical outcome of that game.
Which I need to read, because the very, 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 like the last 2 minutes of the game, which was a non-playable part, just the way that like just before the end credits roll, I'm like, what the hell is this? This is weird. It's like they didn't know how to end this thing, and they wanted to end it, so they just ended it this weird way. So I'm willing to bet they changed it for the comic. I won't go into it just in case, but like, yeah. So I'd have to see how the comic handled it, but I'm pretty sure that in my mind, since 1986 Marty, who had time traveled a year ago, with Doc, I imagine that takes. That's an older version of Doc that's already dealt with Kate, and everything with the time train and everything like that. So in my mind, that's sandwiching Kate Was Here, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I've read all the comics except that adaptation. Not that I wasn't curious, but they were actually pretty expensive. Like, I think more than usual. And so I was like, I'll wait till they're collected, and then I didn't get the collection. But I intend to, because obviously now my personal investment in the Back to the Future continuity is even more than it was before.
Yeah.
So, as for the animated series, though, to my knowledge, the only thing that that happened was there was like a vague reference to it at the end of Kate Was Here in terms of like the facility that Kate meets Doc at.
Yeah, the fact that there's a homestead and a air quotes barn there, where there's a train track. You know, that's in my mind, that's the extent of the animated series, because the animated series doesn't even have continuity with itself. Yeah. Like in the animated series, they go to like the year 3,400 whatever, you know, and they meet like, you know, descendants of Marty that are like flying a spaceship version of the Titanic. You know, it's like it's just a cartoon. Like, it's cartoon logic. Like, there's no true continuity. It's very not even episodic. Every episode's like a one-off isolated thing almost. Like, there's really not a lot of carryover. And it's a little silly. But, you know, that being said, I did make a barn and a homestead and a DeLorean that parks inside the train, which is from the cartoon. But that's, in my mind, that's about as far as it goes in terms of
yeah.
You know.
Now, I regard the comics as hard canon as opposed to, but I suppose in the scope of Kate Was Here, like, that's not the case, only because we know for a fact that there were things that did shift and were different by the end of it. Most of it was like taken into account early on, but then, as we mentioned, I think in the final discussion, that Tales from the Time Train and the World's Fair event that happens in that storyline in the comics,
it would have to be different because Kate interfered with some of those events.
Right. It happened it would have happened differently. So, like, you know, we're not perfectly in continuity. We're just like, I suppose, considerably in continuity.
Like, you could pick up a comic, and you could pick up any of the Back to the Future comics, and it wouldn't really conflict with Kate Was Here.
Right. Most of them take place after Kate Was Here, except for ones that that actually kind of like explain. Some of them put together the events that allowed for the answers to questions within the scope of the timeline of the original three films, questions that are not important to the context of the movies, but do have a certain degree of, I guess, if you decided to go a little bit deeper, or if you're the screenwriter and you've been thinking about it for 30-some years, eventually you come up with some interesting solutions to some plot holes or some unanswered structural questions. And so all that is there, and some of it is taken into account in Kate Was Here. Maybe not all of it. I'm not sure. I haven't reread the books since we did this experiment.
One of the things I'm most proud of in terms of us like solving a problem that to my knowledge wasn't solved in the comics or anything is, how did Doc not know about his tombstone? Like, how did he not know he was going to die in 1885, being shot by Buford Tannen, because his 1955 self saw the tombstone? And the fact that we're like, well, why don't we use Doc's brain device and, you know, erase his memory? I was like, yeah, we plugging up holes in the ship they didn't even know they had, or whatever. Because I remember being on the Back to the Future like subreddit years ago, and someone asked that question, and I'm like, and I remember saying something like, well, because of the way the time ripple works, I forget my exact answer, but I gave some like, you know, like standard Doug answer that's way too long or whatever. And I thought, yeah, but wouldn't it be easier if he was like, I'm just going to erase this? Like, but no one would come and tell him you need to forget this. But now, when we play the game, there you go. It answers it. Like, it's to me, it all makes sense.
We have a couple questions for me specifically. Just asked one in the chat, and gosh, I'm really not sure how to answer it. What's the most memorable role that you made in the course of playing Kate Was Here? The thing about the way that my brain works is that the roles, I can't even discern like a memory of like what is action,
what's rolled and what isn't.
What is decision making. Like, it all just like turns into, the amount that I stepped into the character, the mechanics fell away. The time that most reeked of mechanics in the entire in all of the memory of the experience that I'm like still able to like readily access was
Balloon?
was the balloon chase when things just went really fucking wrong.
But it made sense because you're in a freaking, hot air balloon, shooting a rifle out at people on the like.
Yeah, no,
of course.
I'm
that's
not saying it
difficult.
didn't make sense.
Yeah.
It's just like it was arduous.
It was
and
punishing.
things
Yeah.
went really bad.
Yeah.
I suppose there is to that end a similar stat that worked out once really well and worked out very poorly during that balloon sequence was the first time that Kate used the perfect shot ability. And that was firing the death ray at Biff's goons out the back of the truck, which was crazy. And I was like, not really sure, like, is this camera thing going to translate into a gun thing? And fortunately it did. And that was where, like, Kate as a character really got her hands dirty doing something. I mean, like, Kate's not a stranger sneaking into buildings. She is a stranger sneaking into buildings with her young grandfather, and it's a toxic waste facility, and then she has to confront
She's
the
snuck into the mall.
the president of the United States in her timeline. I mean, like, these are all things that she's not used to, but she is used to sneaking into things, so at least there's that. But then she's firing a gun out the back of a truck and it explodes a car.
Yeah.
So that was a particularly memorable moment, more so for the context, but it is so good that the dice let me actually do that thing, because that was, I think, a moment for both, like, Kate as a character and me as a player to be like, okay, things are really different now. Like, I have to acknowledge how different things are. And it's sort of like also that exciting moment then leads into the trauma of Kate, like, almost fading out of reality. And sort of the first steps of her really grasping the psychological issues of what she's undergoing. Because, like, the blender that she gets hurled through is so much worse than what Marty went through. And, like, Marty, not to knock what Marty went through, like, it's there were certainly many moments of, like, existential dread. Like, for example, like, playing your guitar in front of all these people, including your parents, and your hands disappearing, and like, it's like some kind of
finding your dad murdered in cold blood by the dude who, like, Macbethed your mom,
Yeah, like, these are bad things, but Marty was able to have, like, resolution to all that stuff pretty quickly. So they're kind of like tiny nightmares. Tiny nightmare happens, it all gets reversed, and all of a sudden he very speedily rises up and he's playing the guitar again, no problem. But
because Marty at the end of the day, Marty had a home to go back to.
Yeah,
and Kate lost hers pretty quick.
Now, I mean, also to be fair, when Marty went to the alternative 1985, that was, like, he had every reason to think that maybe things wouldn't get fixed after that.
Sure, but Doc was there with him every step of the way, whereas Kate showed up alone.
Yeah,
for a good portion.
Lots of Kate alone.
Yeah.
It was a journey. What else we got? A question for me from Becky. Do you think Kate would tell anyone about the time travel? And if so, who would be the first person in her life who would find out? Now, Becky has an answer to this, and so I facilitated my own thoughts about this before looking at that part. But yeah, so I mean, in terms of the scope of characters and everything, Kate / me had been building a kind of intention regarding Betty. Like, there was, if Kate ever found any information about Betty, if Kate ever, like, got her hands on a DeLorean with enough spare time to think that maybe she could go back to, like, take care of that,
make sure everything went okay.
Yeah, then she had a bunch of potential considerations there, including, like, picking up Betty probably shortly after the last time they ever had contact and being like, hey, let me explain everything. Like, your life isn't going to end the way you want it to or whatever. So, like, let's just fix that. And thinking, feeling validated in that choice, because if I mean, everybody's life, no matter if they get shut away in a nunnery, has some kind of implications in the world at large. But effectively, she could perceive Betty's line as a dead end if she didn't find any proof of her continued existence.
Mm-hmm.
So, pulling Betty into her life like that is something that she would consider doing, fully acknowledging that they barely know each other and that they have very different goals and beliefs and everything else, and it would the kind of re-education of Betty would be a huge thing of let me explain to you how to get rid of all the brainwashing that you've already got, which is there's a lot of growth that Betty needs to have as a person that she hasn't had the opportunity to, and it's not really Kate's responsibility to do that, but then also Kate's worried about did I make her situation worse by interacting with her? Did I there's a lot of concerns, but ultimately this is a person who is hurting, who's lost, and who might have we don't know what Betty's life was like in the timeline before she met Kate.
I know.
Okay, Doug knows. I wasn't sure that Doug knew. Do you want to share that, Doug?
It's just little tidbits. It's like before, if Kate never arrived, what probably would have happened, I don't think she would have gone to the nunnery. I think she would have gotten close to going to the nunnery, but I think eventually she would have, she may have even gone to the nunnery and then was just like, hey, you know what? I'm not feeling this. My mom forced me into it, and they would have let her go. It's not a prison, they can't force you to stay if you're not actually, into it or whatever.
They can't?
I don't think they can. I don't think they want you if you don't want to be there. You know what I'm saying?
I don't know.
I don't think there's nuns that are it's not like The Great Escape where it's I gotta bust out of the nunnery. I don't think they can keep you there against your will, because if you're not on your knees praying, why do they want you? You're gonna disrupt. You're gonna ruin everything. It ain't like Sister Act, where she's hiding out witness protection.
Or like the Pedro Almodovar movie Dark Habits, which the movie Sister Act is based on.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yep.
Oh wow. Is it a non-funny version of Sister Act?
No, it's a very funny version of Sister Act, but it's a sexy, sordid, queer version of Sister Act with a bunch of drug use. Anyway, that's a story for another time. Tune into Kat's forthcoming series dissecting all of the films of Pedro Almodovar, which is probably not a thing, but I've been thinking about it.
I think after that, she was probably disowned by her family, and that's an unhappy, reality of that whole time period. And I think she just kind of tried to fly under the radar, kind of like It's a Wonderful Life, Jimmy Stewart's, his wife just Mary, don't you know me? And she's this, mousy little librarian. I think her life was just kind of very modest, very quiet. I don't think she ever really would have come out of her shell, because I don't think she ever fully was encouraged or decided to explore who she really is.
Right. But she kissed a girl and she liked it.
Yeah.
And then that girl said, "Go to San Francisco."
Yeah. And after that, everything changes.
Yeah.
But So while I don't think Betty's life was hell, I don't think it was great, and I don't think she was happy. And that's why you didn't even really know about an Aunt Betty, because she was disowned.
Right.
So knowing, you're I don't even know if I have an Aunt Betty. I'm Aunt Betty, she's your aunt. You're is she though? I'm she is. But you just don't know it because she was disowned for being different. Oh gosh, But yeah.
Oh gosh, having trepidation over me kissing my aunt.
Yeah, but that's this is part of the Back to the Future experience.
Yep. Soft incest.
Yeah. But then after your interaction with Betty, with profound discussions and encouragement and things that she never would have gotten from anybody else in that time period.
Well, in a lot of ways, talking to Betty, Kate was talking to herself, because when we started this journey, Kate was like, I think I'm probably gay and I'm not sure. And and then in the middle of it, she was like, okay, very, very gay.
Yeah. And
sorry, not sorry.
When you are in a situation where you've seen somebody go through similar struggles, but in a much more oppressive environment, and you wanting to do no harm and encourage people, and because you think, oh, I'm from the future, I'm so woke, but there was stuff about you didn't even know.
Yeah.
But I think that was an accidental, beautiful kind of storytelling thing that just happens. Because when you're forced to live with these characters longer term, especially when you're trying to treat them like real people, these things start to come up,
Yeah.
As opposed to like, I'm a paladin and that's all I am. Like I'm just continuing on with my thing. I'm a rogue. I'm a bard. I'm whatever. Which, not to shit on D&D. That's just, it's a different game. It's a different experience.
Sometimes you make these friends and you really care about these friends, and then they throw you off of a flying ship.
Yeah.
And you don't know what's going to happen.
John put his hand up.
Yeah, I know. Also, Marcus said, I want to see that movie, Escape from the Nunnery, with, I guess, Snake Plissken's daughter. So we've got a hand up from John Sebastian Laval, star of our follow-up series, The Extermination. John.
Hey, long-time listener, first-time caller, star of the hit blockbuster, The Extermination. My question is, what is your second favorite surprise RPG, and why is it The Extermination?
Okay, cool. Good question. Thank you, John. I think it's The Extermination because Walk in the Park isn't done yet.
Ooh!
Oh!
I was going to say because it's the second longest.
The Extermination is great. I actually am really excited to finish listening to it because I have not heard the episodes from sessions 3 and 4 yet. I was not in the studio when those were recorded.
You were in there for all the fun bits of the reveals, but everything after that, not.
Yeah. Just haven't had the time yet. But soon I hope to, because I've heard good things. Jess asks of me, how did it feel when you figured out that this was going to be a story set in the Back to the Future universe? I was really surprised, and I was really delighted. It had never crossed my mind. And I mean, Doug knows me so well. Doug can play me like a harp. And I don't think I was ready for something that I was like, that I had that degree of personal investment in, nor did I actually realize the degree of personal investment that I had in Back to the Future until this happened. And I was like, well, no, you're right. I've watched the movies a whole bunch, and I read the comic books, and I know a lot about Bob Gale, the screenwriter, and like have watched other movies that he's made. And, yeah, so turns out I'm actually a pretty substantial Back to the Future fan. I didn't even really realize it. Next thing I know, like, my knowledge of expanded continuity was super important because, when Kate steps into the alternate 1985 for the first time, and her disseminating information is part of the reveal to the audience. If anyone's not familiar with it, they will be experiencing that reality through Kate's own memories. And Doug, called upon me and my own knowledge base to fill in the blanks once I realized what had happened. Mm-hmm. And that was really exciting because then I realized I was responsible for providing the gravity of just how fucked up everything was, and that the president that I was nervous about, I didn't know it, but was in fact Biff fucking Tannen. And my own realization of how much worse that is. Possibly. Yeah.
Knowing that you had the knowledge of the movies so that when it's revealed that you're from Hill Valley and you're like, well, because you even said, am I from Hill Valley? And I'm like, yeah. And then you're like, oh, okay. And then you could just sort of see the wheels turning and so that means this is true. And that means, oh my gosh, all this is true, and the domino effect of all the continuity piling up. And that's when I was trying to sort of fill dead air while you're doing that. While I'm like, oh yeah, the list of presidents, it goes in order of this. Boom, ba boom, ba boom, ba boom, ba boom. Vietnam lasted 15 years. All this craziness or whatever. And that gave you time to sort of adjust. And I remember watching, because I was watching very intently as I'm as I'm like, here's the thing I'm going to send you. Bloop, I send you the image, and I'm like watching to see how the reaction is. And your reaction was very minimal, but kind of like you kind of had this dealing with this now, okay, and not like, oh my goodness, yippee, but rather this is a lot. We're just charging ahead. I don't even know what to do. And
I guess because it wasn't I wasn't like, oh, I'm so excited to play in my favorite film. I was already so in the character that I was like, I understand how bad things are now, and I'm actually really worried about how she's going to survive.
Right.
Which was great. which is really good. I also realized that I hadn't finished reading Becky's final question here, which was the thing about who Kate would take. So at a time, I had all these plans for Betty. Like when I was like, every time I asked about Betty, I was like, how am I going to solve this problem? How am I going to do right by her? Mm-hmm. But as it actually has ended, Betty entering into Kate's life as an adult, I think that that's complicated. I'm not sure. Like, I think Kate would probably continue to test the waters to figure out, like, I know it's a preposterous thought, but like, surely it's weird for her that I look like this girl who kind of like, provoked her life in a certain direction. And how strange must that be? But then also, I know that also Kate doesn't look the same as when she met Betty the first time by the time she gets back to 2016. So, there's a lot of questions there about like how much does she suspect, and is it even possible that she could, even because it's such a preposterous thought. And I definitely want to see what happens with Kate playing up that relationship, because all of a sudden, Betty's not a love interest anymore, in theory. Probably not. So it's it's like, then like now, like Kate was the mentor and now Betty's a mentor. Like Betty's like, okay, like young gay, like let me the old gay help inform you in your life, and like also I'm super cool and that's going to be a big positive influence on your world. And I'm like, this is amazing, this is so exciting. But then also, like, Kate's got this weird kind of emotional whiplash because she's been really worried about this person for a long time, and then she's okay, and also the roles have totally reversed. And so that's a weird feeling. That's a really weird feeling. So in that context, it kind of depends on how things go. But if Kate was going to reveal anything, and I think she takes her job as a time traveler pretty seriously in spite of the tagging. I think she thinks that that's all good fun and the universe needs to be challenged like that. But I don't know if she hits things off with Callie Jones, the girl that she's going to go on a date on at the end of the series. That could be a thing.
I hope I don't ruin anything by telling you that, in my mind, Betty doesn't suspect a damn thing.
It is an insane proposition.
Yeah. It was so long ago. Like, you got to keep in mind, like the jump between 1955 and 1985. Like, does Marty's parents know? They might have an inkling. Like it was in high school for them, and this guy, like, high school was only so many years ago. Whatever. For Betty, it's like 60 fucking years ago.
Yeah.
And there's like someone that she met one weekend, doesn't have a photo of.
Right.
Mostly hung out with at night, except for the one time during the day you went out and saw the movie or whatever. Had one letter from. I don't think you could possibly remember what that person's face is. Like, if she even properly even remembers her name. I think she had an important. I think Betty remembers the interaction because it was important. It was a very influential moment where here's someone who's telling me there's more to life than what everyone else is saying. I think she remembers that very fondly and remembers this person fondly. But I don't think you could. I don't think she could even describe what this person even looked like.
Yeah, well, and there's also long-standing questions that she might have, like, okay, so like like Emmett Brown Enterprises or whatever is this like known entity now, and that's definitely the guy that this girl was like staying with, but she was going to be a photographer. She went to France. Can't find any evidence that she ever existed, and that's that could be a haunting thing, but also she's clearly like had other things going on in her life. But it's a weird loose thread in her own reality, in some regards. But yeah, I don't think it doesn't spoil a damn thing because it, her not.
I think her life
there because it's impossible.
Yeah, her life got so complicated so fast after that, and she was on a roller coaster of self-discovery that I think she maybe got curious at a certain point, like whatever happened to that girl, and if she ever reached out to, like, if she ever wrote a letter to Doc Brown, if she ever even thought of doing so, he probably gave an excuse of just like, oh, she's off exploring the world. I don't really hear much from her. We're estranged or whatever.
Yeah.
Doc would have covered for you, but whatever.
So Becky did guess. Great Aunt Betty would be the first person. So correct guess. Ding, ding, ding. You win the Kate Award for best guess for a question.
John says he does have a real question.
Yes. John's real question is as follows. Was there any other pop culture inspiration for your character? No. Kate was entirely autobiographical and everything else was invented on the fly. Like, there's so much about Kate that was pulled from my own life in really weird ways.
Even the circle of friends.
Yeah, even the circle of friends. Not necessarily, like, they weren't necessarily...
Not one-to-one, but...
Yeah, nor were they people I was necessarily directly close with, but people who I interacted with. Like, all these characters, however fleeting they appeared in the show, like, had some kind of background. And there's... I wanted to, like, pull from a lot of, like, the weird, sordid, like, teenage years and misspent youth and stuff that, like, not things that happened. Like, you know, I wasn't a shy person, but I didn't push as hard as Kate did. I didn't have as much direction as Kate did. So Kate is in many regards, an alternate reality self, who's a little bit more specific, more actualized, and also takes way crazier risks. Yeah, I can't think of anybody. That's part of the reason that Kate is Kate and that I had such a profound reaction at the end of it, because there was no let me do a pastiche on this character that I like. It was really personal the whole time. We have a question from Jess to both of us, which is, were you both satisfied with how the story ended? Are there any threads you wish you had explored more?
I mean, I think it's obvious we were both very satisfied.
We were both very satisfied. That's true. However, in regards to threads, Doug, you're more directly aware of the threads that I didn't follow up on. I'm curious which ones you have a curiosity about.
There's none that I'm like, oh, I wish you went off and did this or whatever. But I just had stuff prepared for. Everything having to do with your family in futuristic 2016. Like, your mom is, like, off in Antarctica and shit, and you know, Chiron's there, but, like, what the fact that you even have a brother is weird. You didn't you never really explored much about what your future was like what your family's future. Like, you looked up, like, what's other me doing? And as soon as you saw that it was something that you're not into, you were kind of like, all right, that's enough of that. I'm not interested. They're not me. And I don't think you intentionally distanced yourself from your future family, but you felt like you had more important problems, you know.
I think the whole thing felt like this is either a nightmare that's going to pass or one I'm going to have to live with, but for now, let's try to make it a nightmare that's going to pass.
Yeah. So there was a lot of stuff, like I even mentioned in the one of the post discussions that we did, of just you know, everything with your dad and how your mom is always on the move and kind of is the absentee mom, but not a bad person, but just kind of can't handle it and is the sole breadwinner, you know, so she has to keep doing this job that keeps her away. Chiron, what are his dreams and hopes, and, like, what's he going to school for? Because he kind of was the art kid in the family, but not to the same extent that you were.
Yeah.
Also, it's a different time with, you know, holograms and shit, you know, so a lot of confusion on what he could even do when following those passions. Everything having to do with Chiron's tag, like, if you had started the story thread of using your 2016 phone to scan Chiron's tag to see what video messages he left behind on each of them, you would have found way more of Chiron's tags in, like, a wasteland future, you know, like, sort of chronicling what happened, you know, and yeah. So there was but those are almost like, you know, Easter eggs, as opposed to, like, a problem to solve, but rather, like, answers to questions about,
you
know, what happens.
Well, to that end, a lot of people have told me that they really liked Kate's conflict/violence free attempt at solving the situation with Marty Jr. and Griff, and I did too, and I'm really glad that, like, you know, that's something where I, like, it's a very, you know, in retrospect, almost as soon as it happened, I was like, okay, this is interesting, because, like, I was just trying something out, just doing what felt natural. But I recognize that I have passed on potentially a very cinematic series of events. And I kind of felt bad about that, only because, like, bam, biff, pow, like, action-packed stuff is what people come to the show for, in theory.
But it's not.
But it turns out it wasn't,
Yeah.
which is great. Like, people love the genuine nature of what, like, the way Kate solves problems.
But this whole experiment was to see how you reacted to the game. It wasn't about, let's make a great show for everyone to listen to, which,
Right.
it's glad. I'm so glad that it's been entertaining, but that was a tertiary goal. That was like, third on the list of things I wanted to accomplish.
So to that end, I am really curious what would have happened if Kate had attempted to sub in for Marty Jr. there, and how, like, I don't know what the nature of that theft or how that would go down, or what opportunities there were for me to reframe, restage that thing, or, fuck over Griff and his gang or anything. I don't know anything about how that would have happened. And Kate, certainly was really worried about, like, the risks associated with that. She didn't feel, she was ready to beat up a bully in an alleyway, but not to, like, be
A thief.
yeah, well, or attempt to actually, like, do a Batman, kind of
Right.
thing.
Yeah.
And so that was a big thing. And then also, like, there's a lot of curiosity was built up over Chiron over time, but I didn't make the time to, like, really figure that out. I would like to know better who he is as a person, especially because he ended up being a lasting part of Kate's life. And of course, now I don't really, like, the difference between the various versions of Chiron. I'm not 100% sure who he is in the way that we leave the story.
Right.
Especially if Chiron was the artist, and, like, are they both artists, or, like, what is his identity now under these circumstances? But Marty Jr. took the focus. Kate didn't want to risk outing herself any more than she already was, and as such, and also she was concerned with, like, this is not going to be important. This is someone else's life. I don't want to get caught up in this, because if I hit the reset button on all this guy's going to go away. So, like, as much morbid curiosity as I have, I need to, like, keep moving.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, in the end, especially, like, Kate has a lot of questions about her family and the people in her life and all that, and is, learning slowly as her brain adjusts what the differences are. But she's also not the person that they last knew, and I think she's pretty curious about how that's gonna shake out in the wash. Just really figuring out her life. Like, is she a student? Is she a time traveler? Like, how's that gonna play out? What's gonna be her comfort level with the remainder of her life? Like, she had some pretty intense direction when it was life or death every day for a few months. How long was it? I forget.
Oh, that was something I calculated. I can actually tell you. I forgot that was even a thing I could reveal. That I actually went and I listened to him, like, okay, this went this time here, and I went over my notes and was like, okay, so I landed at 2:00 on this day. How many days in this month, or whatever. So I can give you a very accurate number, give or take a certain amount, but I wrote it down again, so I wouldn't have to remember.
Well then.
Yeah, here we go. Okay, so...
Kate has been in the time stream for...
113 days, 2 hours, 15 minutes. And that equates to almost 4 months, exactly.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
That's a third of a year.
Yeah. So basically, let's just say 4 months.
Yeah.
113 days, 2 hours, 15 minutes. And I have the timeline, like, I wrote down, like, when you disappeared and when you reappeared, and, like, all the how many hours in each era and everything, and yeah, totally all up. That was my calculation. Yeah, that's a lot. That's
If she keeps that kind of thing up, she's gonna be so much older than her peers. It's gonna get extra weird. The, like, maturity that she's continuing to gain as she persists in this career of time travel. To wrap things up, we have a wonderful last question from Jess for both of us. Would you ever consider telling further adventures of Kate, or adventures set in this continuity? Perhaps Betty's story?
I hadn't thought about doing Betty's story, but it's like I'd almost think like Kat shouldn't play Betty. Like that has to be a different person.
I think so
You
too.
know,
I mean, like I'm obviously very curious, but
then
yeah.
it's like, who would you pick to say, do you want to play a closeted lesbian teenager in 1958 and just live a normal life where nothing really that exciting happens, and just to see what happens?
I can think
I
of a
don't
few
know.
people who might bite.
It's just playing like you're basically playing tabletop The Sims 1958. You know, like yeah. I mean, I think story wise, I would like to hear like. I'd like to explore that, see what happens. But in terms of further adventures of Kate, I have so many ideas. But I don't know if I don't. That's the thing. So
Wow,
many
it's
ideas.
turned into so many
Yeah,
ideas.
but I don't know.
now.
But I don't know if we'll do any of them. 'Cause
Before it was a few ideas.
yeah, and that was one of the things. The one question I was going to ask you, I was like, oh yeah, I might ask a question or whatever. Again, you know, you're kind of being put on the spot, so there's really not much preparation. But if there was going to be another story, I think the start of it would most likely be Doc saying, "Hey, Kate, I did the calculation. You've been out of the time stream for 4 months. You're 4 months older than you should be right now.
Uh-huh.
I want to jump you ahead 4 months from now, so that your clock is like synced up, you know, with what you're supposed to be living, right? But since it'd be unfair to just pluck you out and drop you immediately off 4 months later, you know, maybe we'll have a victory lap touring the time stream in places wherever you would want to go. So if you could think of 3 to 5 places Kate would want to visit, not just when, but also like where, because now Doc has the ability to go physically to different places. Where would be 3 to 5? Would you say, or would be top destination vacation visits for Kate?
Gosh.
In a pure, fun, whimsical way, not in like a, you know, let's solve a murder way.
That's pretty wild. Because I have to then ask myself, like, what does Kate, a 16-year-old in 2016, like, I personally have a pretty wide grasp of, like, history and all the weird nuanced bullshit I'd want to get up to.
Right.
Not necessarily the same as Kate.
But Kate having been to the Old West and all these other things and whatever, and if it's just like, hey, no world-ending bullshit, just us, like we hop in the train, you know, and we get to go see a place. You could photograph it, you could film it, you know, safely, you know, whatever. What would be like just like, wow, I would love to see how they built the pyramids, or I would love to, you know, see them, you know, stab Julius Caesar, which is really dark, but I just think of a historical event that we don't have a lot of documentation of.
I think she would want to. I think she would want to go to the Isle of Lesbos and really like commemorate her new life as an openly queer woman by hearing the poems of Sappho spoken aloud. I don't know how, like, there's such a language barrier there. I don't know how any of that would.
But this is pie in the sky,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah. Kate really wanted to like do teenage stuff in the 1980s. I think she thought that was pretty cool, but it never happened because, I mean, she could have forced the issue, but every time that sort of became a possibility, she was very much like, things are bad and I have to take care of a problem now. It's like the closest she got was hanging out with Jennifer. And I think Kate would want to hang out with Jennifer and Marty in a post Back to the Future 3 comic book era timeline. Now, I don't know if Doc is going to be cool with that because in a lot of ways, like, it's okay that some Martys at different points in time know that Kate exists, but also because Kate is further ahead in the future and he's so protective of Marty's time, like what Marty does and doesn't know, he's less protective about what Kate does and doesn't know. And I think that's probably, that actually, in a way, Kate Was Here goes in a direction that makes the Marty thing.
Depending on when you show up, you'd be on equal footing, though.
Yeah. I think it's kind of like Kate is in a lot of ways, but like she becomes Doc's true protege because Kate is so far in Doc's future that she can, if he views her as like the kind of like end point from which like further exploration happens, Marty is somebody who he's focused on the future of even more so than Kate's future. He's like, you and Jennifer are like, go lead a good life or whatever. Like that's kind of the note that the series ends on.
It's like because Marty is his genuine friend of a natural timeline, and Marty's life accidentally got fucked up because of Doc.
Right.
So like he kind of owes it to his friend to help fix it and make sure he, helps him. Whereas Kate, through weird circumstances of her own, fell backwards into time and is seeking help, was more of like an orphan, like, like literally like, well, metaphorically knocking on his door being like, I need my help, which, is kind of how Doc met Marty, which, there's parallels. It's like poetry. It rhymes.
Uh-huh.
But Kate, it was like an accident. It was more of an accident of her fault that really didn't have much to do with Doc Brown. Although you could argue the whole timeline was skewed because of Marty fucking up, which that's a whole other can of worms. I don't know if like Kate would be like, I wouldn't exist if you didn't steal that fucking book, or whatever. I don't know. But either way, it was different circumstances on how each of you met Doc and like who you are to him because of how you met, like how much responsibility he feels that he has over not each person's destiny, but rather influence on their life and telling them what their future is like,
Yeah.
So
like Kate's in a weird place because she both does and doesn't have a relationship with Marty and Jennifer. And now if she showed up in 1986, let's say, they'd be like, "Oh shit, it's you from that thing that happened that one time." And
other than ancient Lesbos and 1980s Hill Valley,
or I don't know, some kind of SoCal teen experience like in the movies, because Kate's whole barometer for like any kind of 80s enthusiasm
the Spielbergian
is purely the like 80s nostalgia of the era that we're still in presently. Otherwise, I think she'd probably try to see a really cool concert, but I mean, like, really, she should be thinking bigger than that. And I think
that's I'd put you on the spot, but I am curious. Like, if down 3 days from now, oh my God, she would love to do this. Like, you could text or whatever. I'm just because I'm curious. Like, because again, not saying like I'm fishing for like, oh, what's gonna happen, but rather like because it's all informative of like I'm curious as to how Kate views the idea of time travel as a vacation and not so much like end of the world, we gotta fix shit.
Yeah, I mean, I think she is concerned about the future because she has been consistently concerned about the future, and now at this point she is in a timeline that works for her, but she doesn't know where it's going, and that's like she and Doc made the decision to jump ahead for that purpose before, and I think she probably expects that it would happen again. That like they would, it's not their job to necessarily protect the future, but maybe it should be.
With great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah, pretty much. So that's not a vacation. And of course, Doc and Marty do jump ahead even further than they did before. They jump to what year was it? Like, was it 2021?
It was something.
In the
comics,
like
2040 something as well. Like they go pretty far ahead. But.
Yeah, and so like, and all that was that was some serious shit. And granted, of course, that happened with Marty and not Kate, but
also I don't know if that future still exists.
Yeah, it's hard to say. It's really hard to say. We'd have to like dig in pretty deep to figure that out. Where else? Okay, let's go deep into history. Let's go to.
Is there an aesthetic that you like? Like, oh yeah, this.
I think for all the danger of it, Kate really enjoyed the Ice Age thing. I think that this is pretty like cliche, but like let's see some dinosaurs. Like let's do.
That's pretty tempting. Like, how could you, like, you have a time machine, like, as long as you do it safely, we plan in advance, and it's like, I kind of want to see a dinosaur.
Because
like,
in a lot of ways, like, she's photographed some really compelling, like human moments and vistas and so forth, but the nature photography expedition that she went on in the Ice Age was, for her, like, hobby / career, one of the wildest things she's ever done.
Yeah.
And it was very dangerous, but...
Yeah, I figured, like... Hey mom, hey dad, know that internship? Doc Brown says that because of the internship, before I go to college in like 6 months, I'm gonna go on a 4-month photo safari. We're gonna go check out different continents or like whatever, but in reality, you're gonna be skimming through time, not for 4 months, but
right.
Hitting all the hot spots, taking cool photos and high-fiving and and seeing cool shit that no one's ever seen.
Yeah, and I think it's Kate being a teenager. I'm not sure at what point she'll want to like come back and be like, okay, yeah, no, but for real, like I think just sitting back and learning would be good. I think she is 100% in the right age to think like now, like having had the cycle of like modern America interrupted, she's like, no, now is the time for adventure. I'm young and I'm gonna have these crazy exploits and things are gonna be like life or death often.
It's like before you go to college, you got to do the European backpacking trip, and it's like, oh, I got better than that.
And there will come a time where she's like, okay, it's time for me to like I've done my adventuring. I'm gonna settle down and like put what I've learned to work. And I guess I think it would probably be hard for her to think, yeah, it's time for me to like go to college and like be beholden to this shit because I don't know, she'd be so much older. It's hard to say what's gonna like how logistically her life can work out, but at the same time, yeah, she has to ask a lot of questions of herself about who she wants to be and ask real questions about the difference between what she is like setting out on and what she really wants from her life. But I mean, in the way she doesn't, but then at the same time, every moment she spends in the time stream is time that she is in fact actually aging.
Mm-hmm.
So like,
yeah, you don't stop aging no matter where you go.
There comes a point at which it becomes inexplicable, and that's difficult. That's a difficult thing to do, especially when you have another adventure in her repertoire of adventures is figuring out what is her new life. She's only just gotten there. She is actually, much to her surprise, excited, not necessarily to go to college, but to find out like what's the deal with her new family dynamic and what's the deal with these friends and who can she become now that she feels like she has, had her own kind of graduation in a lot of ways. And she has stepped into adulthood in a really profound way and is completely changed. So she could keep going on adventures, but also she's equally intrigued by, but what happens when I'm me now? That's also an interesting question. But it's a really difficult one to deal with because she's always going to feel like an outsider now, even more than before.
Yeah. You shot cowboys.
Yeah.
Like, it's hard to come back from that, and not be like, all right, let's do trigonometry.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's impossible. That's just absolutely impossible. Take the GRE and get the fuck out of there. Like,
If we ever going to play again, that would be something we would have to explore.
Yeah, and I don't really know the answer to that. I have to ask myself some pretty hard questions. And that is the end of the Kate Was Here Q&A. Other features to go with this is we will be releasing some graphic design that we did. Before we put out the first episode, we did this recording. We had no idea what it was going to be called. The Kate Was Here tag was kind of like as a title was an afterthought, and hate to say this, but I actually added in the mention of it in the first or second episode. Like that wasn't originally there because we came up with the title that was so good. I'm like, oh, this needs to be a part of her thing.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, let me just add that in real quick. We at one point we were thinking about just calling the show Missing because it was vague. Like the thing of like having a compelling title that doesn't tell you what it's about, but also is like intriguing enough. That was tough. That was really tough. So when we got on Kate Was Here and I was able to do the emoji Mobius strip arrow thing, and I was like, this feels good. But for a while, the big contender was Double Back, which we did a logo in the style of Back to the Future, which is realistically nothing we ever would have released because that is a dead giveaway. But there was one that had a Double Back in blue and then Double Back in yellow reversed and both kind of like in an arrow thing. And there's this kind of like timeline looking
laser thing.
I thought it was potentially vague enough. I liked the way it looked, but I showed it to some friends and was like, hey, so if I told you this was a show based on a property, but you didn't get to know what that property was, would you be able to guess what it was? What do you think this is for? And in spite of my best efforts, it was Back to the Future. So we got those special features. You got a special feature as well, Doug.
Yeah, as per a Doug Banks special, I made a Spotify playlist. So there's an unofficial, official, however you want to put it, Kate Was Here Spotify playlist that has music of the different time eras that Kate went through, a lot of them that appear on the show. So if you play it from the beginning and listen to it without interruption, it takes you on the same historical journeys, hopping back and forth between time periods and whatnot, all featuring stuff that's used in the show in some way or another, and ending with the ELO's "Way Life's Meant to Be," which every time I hear it, I only think of Kate Was Here now. And like when I'm in the car and I'm listening and Power of Love comes on, I'm like, I think of Kate Was Here. It's like, it's hard for me to, like, I'll picture Marty on a skateboard, but then I immediately picture like Kate like ducking in the bushes trying to avoid him. You know what I mean? Like it's very hard for me to separate it now in a way that I'm like, oh, this is really enjoyable. And it's not just like, it feels so different from from fan fiction-y thoughts. You know what I mean? Like I've had those thoughts before, especially when I was younger, like, oh, like, if there was ever another Star Wars, Han Solo and Luke Skywalker would get back together and save the day. It's different from that. Like there really is like a strong tie to it that I can't. In my mind, it's almost impossible to remove. Which I don't know if that's healthy, but either way, I enjoy it. Like it feels special.
It's our experience, and now it's your experience too. And I'm actually curious to know what you folks who've been with us on this journey, like, has this affected your experience of Back to the Future or anything like that? There are many ways to answer that question, either on Discord or in the comments and so forth. We'd love to know if Kate Was Here has any of its lasting tendrils on you as much as it does have on us.
I'm especially curious if you listen to the show and then watch the movies, or maybe watch the movies and listen to the show, like within like, I don't want to say marathon it, but like listen to them in quick enough succession. Is there anything that you pick up on that like changes the way you view the movie or hear the show or whatever? Because that's something I've yet to deep dive into myself.
It is weird. It feels like this stuff, even though like I'm watching Marty's story, but also within there are fragments of stuff where a part of my brain is registering
in the background. Yeah,
this is a part of my life.
Yeah,
like this is a part of something that I actually like lived, and it was my life, and that feels very strange, but also pretty rad.
Yeah.
Marcus says, I've watched the movie since, and I absolutely see the story differently now.
That's awesome. Because it's like, when I'm watching Back to the Future 2 after we played the game, I'm like, it's all laying around in there. Like, it's all, like, there's Kyron's tag, and, Kate's dad's way over there, and, and I know that Kate's in the thing down the street over there waiting, and Marty's in the phone booth, and Doc's like, all right, precisely on schedule. He's not talking about just Marty. It's like everything is happening, like, that whole sequence.
Becky says Kate Was Here and the Exterminators both in terms of, like, the impact. So that's really cool. And Marcus goes on to say, I can't help but think of the off-screen events happening on HQ.
Yeah, like when he's just like, run the corner, Cafe 80s, a guy named Griff, just say no. And he gets into the DeLorean and drives away. He pulls over, in front of Kate and's like, quick, Kate, get him in the car. It's like, I'm so happy because in my mind, I'm like, I can see that happening even as I'm watching it. Okay, the camera's going to follow Marty, but this shit's still happening over here. Because the movie never addresses what was going on. It's like, why does Doc not help him? Why does Doc just fuck off and,
Where is he going? What is he doing?
Yeah.
What's even happening?
Yeah.
Well, now we know.
And everyone's like, there's a meme. For a guy who has a time machine, he's always in a hurry. Like, quick, get in the car. I got to save, we got to save your kids. I'm like, but he's not saving the kids. He's saving Marty and Jennifer from getting in a terrible car wreck because Kate's waiting for them. It's like it all, Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, and now we have altered the timeline, Doug. Yeah. Like we have made modifications to a massive pop cultural event, and over the course of this like over 33-hour long journey, shifted the ways that people perceive a cultural touchstone. That's pretty fucking weird, and also it's a very serious privilege, honor. The right word isn't coming to me.
Yeah. But
we don't take it lightly.
No, but it's changed it profoundly for me, like watching it and even thinking about it or listening to the music. So, yeah. But I'm just happy, glad everyone here. I mean, I'm assuming you all enjoyed it, but I feel so rewarded having other people feel even just a fraction of that.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here for this Q&A, for asking questions, and especially for joining us on this incredible, life-changing journey. We will see you in the future.
Yeah, next time.
Else time.